The McCloskeys. So remember them? I talked about them. We've got Mark and we've got Patricia McCloskey. This story happened a little bit ago, and these are the two guns that they've got. So keep a mental note of this. We've got an AR-15 type of weapon. We've got a looks like a small 38 or something like that she has. They call it a semi-automatic handgun. You can see her finger is on the trigger. She's got an angry face. His finger is not on the trigger. He's got a little bit more trigger discipline. And so when this story happened, this couple lives in a very affluent neighborhood. They have a huge mansion, and there were protesters who were walking down the street, and they sort of made a detour. I have a map, and I'm going to show you what that looks like, what kind of their progression was. And they came upon the McCloskeys' property, and they responded. They brought out guns. They said they called the police. There's a 911 call that took place. Patricia called, and apparently the police weren't responding. And this group of protesters, there's some debate about how they got onto the property. Now, the McCloskeys, of course, are saying that they broke a gate and they ran through and they were feeling threatened and scared, whereas the actual prosecutor out of Missouri is saying, nope, they were peaceful. They just opened the door and they just walked on through. It was a peaceful protest, and therefore grabbing your guns and pointing them in their direction, that is not okay. That's what this prosecutor is saying. He's saying you basically can't defend yourself. You can't protect your life or your property from a group of protesters. And so, interesting debate, as always, is on these types of cases, and so we're going to talk about it. What I want to do, though, is go to the primary source. When these things happen, when you're trolling around on Twitter or Facebook, or you're reading a lot of these news articles, you're going to see a lot of people just bifurcate. The gun rights people, who I'm one of those people, are going to really side, for self-defense and defense of property and preservation of property and life. And on the other side, you're going to have people who say this was outrageous. These are racist, white, rich people who are part of the establishment. They're part of the hierarchy of institutional white systemic racism, or whatever language they want to use. And so they take that side, that these people should be charged, they should be arrested. And so it gets very polarized. You don't really know what to think. News articles take clips from other news articles, and it turns into this whole spiral. Everything kind of gets out of control. So let's kind of get rid of the noise, right? Let's take a look at the actual charging document. So these are going to be the documents that the prosecutor's office actually files with the court. They're saying, we've done our investigation, we've gathered the facts, we've talked to enough people, and this is why we think they broke the law. So they send that off to the court, they charge them, and the case actually gets started. So we want to look at those documents, because that's really where it all begins. And in order to do that, let's start here. Let's start with Mark's case first. So here is a copy of the complaint itself. Let me get this queued up so we can take a look at it. So you can see right here, the state of Missouri. This is where this is all taking place. We've got the defendant. We've got his name, Mark McCloskey here. We've got his date of birth and all his identifying information as well. Now, when you go down here, what you're going to see is the charge. He was charged with unlawful use of a weapon, subsection 4, exhibiting basically displaying a firearm, and it's a Class E felony. So, of course, I am an Arizona lawyer. I'm also licensed in California, but our office is in Scottsdale, Arizona, and so I don't practice Missouri law. I don't know much about it, but I did. When I review these cases, I look at the statutes, which we've got, and I look at the charging documents. And so, Missouri felonies, to my understanding, a Class E is really the lowest, and you can see it down here. I sort of made a little quick chart here. A is going to be the most serious. E is going to be the least serious. And so in terms of severity, this really is sort of the least severe, would be comparable to a Class 6 felony in the state of Arizona. Now, that being said, it's a felony. Okay, this is a big deal. It's not a misdemeanor. So for most localities, things like a DUI or first offense domestic violence, those types of things, those are all misdemeanors, which is a lower classification of a crime. Felonies are a big deal. If you get convicted of a felony, we're talking about sending somebody to prison versus sending somebody to jail, which would be the case in a misdemeanor situation. So the McCloskeys have both been charged with felonies, and felonies, like I said, it's a big deal. You lose your right to vote. You lose your right to possess a firearm if you're convicted of a felony. And you also lose rights to certain benefits. McCloskeys don't have this issue. They've got plenty of money, but if you wanted to apply for student loans or federal housing or housing benefits or local benefits or any of those things, you can be denied because you have that felony prior conviction. They may not want you to live in their apartment complex, or they may not want you to get a job there. So it's a big deal. And just because the McCloskeys don't necessarily have anything to be concerned about related to those repercussions, it still is a big deal. They're being charged with felonies. Now, a couple things I highlighted in the document that I want to review with you. So what we're seeing here in this language, so this is how we sort of analyze statutes, or this is how I did it when I was in law school and how I do it now. But what they're saying is they're referencing these two subsections of the Missouri statutes, the revised statutes, and they're saying on this date, and they're going through and they're listing out these different elements. Okay, so here is the elements from the statute itself. One, the McCloskeys, in this case Mark, knowingly exhibited in the presence of one or more persons a semi-automatic rifle, a weapon readily capable of lethal use in an angry or threatening manner. Okay, so you see how I label those 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5? Those are the different elements. So it's just like baking a cake, right? You need to go get eggs, you need to go get flour, you need to go get milk and all of those things. And if you have each one of those and you assemble them correctly, your cake's going to turn out well, right? That's what we're doing here. We're identifying the different ingredients that are in the statute. And if the conduct, meaning if the things that the McCloskeys allegedly did, if they meet those different elements, if they have milk, if they have eggs, if they have flour, then that's going to meet the elements of the offense, and that's going to give them enough evidence to file the charges and move forward. So when we're looking at it, when we're analyzing the probable cause statement, which is what we're going to get to, we want to identify these three different statutes, or these different elements. If this is the law, where in the conduct are we seeing this, that they knowingly exhibited the weapon, that they were in the presence of one or more people, that they had a semi-automatic rifle, and so on and so forth. So as we're reading through it, let's just keep in your mind, we're identifying elements 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right, I don't need to spend any more time on that. Hopefully you can follow along with me there. Now, Christopher Hinckley, of course, this is the assistant circuit attorney, or district attorney, they would call it. And he's the same in both cases. So Kimberly Gardner, covered her. She is I believe she's the state prosecutor for this particular jurisdiction. And so she didn't sign these documents. She actually sent them to an assistant circuit court attorney who is also a prosecutor, and his name is Christopher Hinckley. So he's going to review the documents and he's going to sign off on it. He's going to say, I read the probable cause statement from the assigned investigator from law enforcement. I believe it to be true and accurate. I'm going to swear it in, and I'm going to submit that off to the court. So it's his name on this document. Keep that in mind as well. All right, so now that we have all of that, the foundation sort of laid out, let's take a look at the actual probable cause statement. Now, a probable cause statement, before we dive into it, in order for somebody to bring charges, there needs to be some cause. In law, we call it probable cause, that it's more likely than not, in other words, that a crime was committed. You can't just call and say, hey, my neighbor stole my lawnmower, if there's no evidence at all about it. So you could make that claim, but is there any real cause? I mean, is there evidence that your gate was open? Is your lawnmower in his backyard? What is there that's more substantive that's going to lead to the charges having some merit, having some weight? And that's what this is intending to do. So we want to justify the charges. And of course, that's where we lean on law enforcement and investigators to do the work. So here we've got Curtis Bergdorf, which is a great name, knowing, I want to read this carefully, right? I, Curtis Bergdorf, knowing that false statements on this form are punishable by law, state that the facts contained herein are true. All right, so keep that one in mind, right? We've got that listed here on Mark's case. We've got that listed on Patricia's case. I, Curtis Bergdorf, knowing that false statements on this form are punishable by law, state that the facts contained herein are true. Put a pin in that because we're going to get back to that. And here's what he says. I have probable cause to believe that Mark McCloskey, so on and so forth. Here are the facts that he is alleging. It's not a lot, and it's basically the same in both situations, so we can get through this pretty quickly. He says here, my investigation, which included, essentially, he was not there, right? This investigator was not there. This all happened. The protesters moved away, and the investigation took place after the fact. So that's different from like a DUI crime. When you're stopped on the side of the road, you're kind of caught right in the middle of it. This investigator came upon the scene after the fact. Okay, so keep that in mind. Numerous eyewitness interviews, review of the video footage revealed that on this date, the protesters marched, which proceeded through the central West End neighborhood, ending up in Kings Highway Boulevard. The protesters marched north on Kings Highway until reaching Portland Place, where one group continued north and the other went west onto Portland Place. All right, so they just gave us this little brief recitation of the facts. Where were the protesters coming from? Where were they going? Now, this is not something that I had seen previously, and so I didn't really see any good analysis on this. So I want to show you what we're looking at in terms of where the protesters were and where they were going. So here is a map. And according to that report, to that charging document, the probable cause statement, which was sworn under the penalty of being punished by law, here's what we've got. This is a map from Google. And this is Kings Highway Boulevard. And so the protesters are marching north. And as is stated in the document, about half of them continue marching north. I believe they were marching to the mayor's house. That's what they were protesting. And about half the group made a left turn right here. And so this is Portland Place. Portland Place right here, you can see the pin on that. One Portland Place is directly from the charging document. This is where the McCloskeys live. So that's their house. And so you can see this little weird sort of, it's almost like a private homeowners association. You know, they've got some private property. There's a number of different homes that are all built here, and they have their own little private sort of street. So this is where this all took place, right? They came right through the gate. This is the McCloskeys' residence right here. They grabbed their firearms, and they were right on the front porch of their property as people were passing by. So that is sort of what we've been able to piece together from the probable cause statement. That's what the officer said in their own words. So as they were doing that, let's see what that looks like, right? So they're walking up, and this is a street view version or angle that you can see here. And this is Kingsman Boulevard. And right here, when I drop the little man on the map, this is Portland Lane. So this is the gate that they're talking about. And we're going to get there real quickly, but I just want you to understand. So the protesters are walking down, they're walking north, they're going to the mayor's house, they're going to make a left turn, and they're going to enter this area right here. All right, so now that we have that, let's take a look back at the actual charging document, and we'll pick it up from there. So here's where we get back to it. So we've got two victims. So they went west onto Portland Place. They were going north on Kings Highway. They reached Portland Place, where one group continued north. The other went west onto Portland Place. MD and MH, who are the victims. Now, as I said, right, I wrote a number 2 here. Why is that? Well, because if we scroll back up and we look at the element number 2, in the presence of one or more persons. Boom, we got that, right? They've got two victims. They've labeled them here, MD and MH, which of course is not unusual because you want to protect the victim's identity. So we've got two people along with other protesters, so that second element is being met. They walked through the gate onto the street and sidewalks of Portland Place. So they walked. Did they just walk, though? Did they? Do you remember? I covered it on the show a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, I don't recall, but there was a broken gate that took place. There's pictures of it. So let's take a look. So did they just walk right through it or not? Let's see. So if we go back, let's take a look at the map. So when we continue on our street view level, and we look to the west, we look over onto Portland Lane. This is what it looks like, right? We've got a gate here that's closed. We've got, and it says private street, no entry. We've got another private street sign here, okay? 3 signs right here, 1, 2, and 3. And it looks pretty clear. If you zoom in on this, it says private road, private property. In other words, don't enter. You know, this is all private. This is not public land. The people who live in this area are part of a private community. They've got private property. They've got, I'm sure they pay certain amounts for upkeep and to maintain that. And so the people who were coming through there, you know, this is not public. It's private. There are 3 signs listed there. Now, I don't know where this came from, if this was after the fact or before the fact. I think it was from before, because all this happened very recently, and I can't imagine that Google Earth updated, you know, their screens. There are ways to find that out. It's a little tip. There are different software and different ways you can find out when the images were uploaded. Actually, I think it's actually listed now. Yeah, so this image was actually captured on April 2019. So Google is now telling you when this was captured. So April 2019. So this was before any of this stuff took place. So this is what it looked like, presumably, when the protesters were there. Well, the probable cause statement that they said that they just walked right through there. Does that look like that's inviting, that you can just say, come on in? It does not look like that to me. It looks like those are probably locked. It looks like that there's probably a key that you need to get in or a remote or something like that, because there are some very affluent people who live in this neighborhood. Now, the next image I want to show you, of course, is from after the protest. So here is that gate, and it looks exactly like the gate, right? This matches the images that I just showed you. Somebody took a picture of this. Looks like this was right on the other side of the gate. And so that gate is mashed to bits. I mean, that doesn't look anything like a peaceful protest at all. And so if the McCloskeys, if you remember back to that map, their property is right next to this entrance. So if they're standing at their property, if they're on their porch, if they're in their home, they hear an unruly crowd who is coming down the street, and they look, and this crowd just broke through their gate and is literally smashing the metal and cracking the gate and breaking it every which way. I mean, look at this thing. They didn't just walk through a door, right? This doesn't look like it was just, it looks like it was smashed into bits, because it was. And does that match the report? I mean, so let's go back to it. Let's take a quick look. What does it say? Along with other protesters, walked through a gate onto the street and sidewalks of Portland Place. So yeah, technically, I'm sure they walked. I'm sure they didn't crawl, but it sounds like they kind of broke through a gate. Looks like they broke through a gate on the sidewalks of Portland Place. And because the officers weren't there to see it, it's going to be very difficult to get any accurate statements to that regard, right? The protesters could have said, it was broken when we got there, and we did just walk through it. And McCloskey's could have said, no, it was perfectly locked and closed, and they smashed it down. Unless there's any camera footage that comes out or anybody has any cell phone footage about what actually happened, doesn't look to me, based on the evidence, that they just walked through it. I don't see that. You're entitled to that opinion, but I don't see any evidence of that fact. There's a photograph that the gate was mashed and mangled. And so it seems to me like they actually broke the gate. They didn't just walk through it. Here's another image here. We've got before the protesters, we've got a private street, access limited to residents. Okay, it's not open to the public. And after the protest, here's the gate. Right, same rock, same trees, bushes area. You know, it looks like they just mashed the heck out of that gate. And so, in my mind, that probable cause statement is certainly lacking in that regard. It does not look like they just walked through it. It looks like there was more damage done. Upon entering Portland Place, these two, MD and MH, and other protesters were, of course, immediately confronted by the defendant armed. So there's element number 3, armed with a semi-automatic weapon, which is going to be this element here, a semi-automatic rifle. So they've just labeled that one out. And the defendant, so this is Mark, he's screaming at the demonstrators, which is going to be what they're going to use to get element number 5, which is threatening. Lowered his semi-automatic rifle, pointed it towards a group of protesters walking through the gate and onto Portland Place. Now, for some reason, this officer decided, or this investigator decided to include all of this statement, which is really all relevant to Patricia. I mean, it's really not particularly relevant to Mark's case, but these are very similar. So I'm thinking he just kind of copied and pasted and wrote the same probable cause statement for both people. But he says shortly thereafter, Patricia emerged and does the same thing. I'm going to skip over that because we're going to get to her probable cause statement very quickly. And he goes back. Defendant, so that's Mark, joined his wife on the street side of Portland Place, still armed with a rifle. Defendant and Patricia continued to yell at protesters while pointing their firearms at the protesters and standing on the sidewalk and the street. So they were angry. Okay, they were angry, which is going to meet element number 5, angry or threatening manner, which is, you know, what they're going to try to hang their hat on. Now, the last little note I want to make, the McCloskeys, you know, they're trained lawyers. They know what they're doing. So when they're going around making all of these statements, they're doing it with the forethought. They know what they're doing. They're making all of these really dangerous, what are called admissions. So you probably heard in the movies and the TV shows, right? If the police ask you questions, you invoke your right to remain silent. The magic words are, officer, I've been advised not to talk to you until I speak with my attorney. But otherwise, you just say, I want to remain silent. I want my attorney. I want legal counsel present. Because when you start making statements, the cops will just take those and use them against you. They're called admissions. And that's exactly what happened here. So this officer is taking the McCloskey's admissions and throwing them right into the probable cause statements. He says, since June 28th, the defendant made several public statements describing the incident. The defendant has repeatedly acknowledged that he and Patricia brandished weapons, more specifically a rifle and a pistol. So this is why admissions are so damaging. If you make them, they're going to use them against you. Now, as I said, the McCloskeys know what they're doing. These people have been lawyers for a long time. I believe they have criminal legal experience as well. Part of what they're doing by going around and doing all these interviews and all of these circuits is, of course, to increase their exposure, to increase their profile, and to, build up a little bit of a brand name, to become advocates, to become fighters. There's no question in my mind that they're doing some of that. And that's what people do, right? If you're involved in a situation, they have sort of become the avatar for gun rights and home, self-defense and the Castle Doctrine and the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms and all of these things. They've kind of become the poster couple for that cause. And so, of course, they want to continue to cultivate that and nurture that as their sort of time in the spotlight is still available. So that's why they're doing it. So my point is when they're going around and making admissions, they're doing it because they're weighing the benefit, the cost versus the benefit. They're saying, we know that we're making admissions that may not be helpful in our criminal case, but we're doing it for the bigger cause. We want this mouthpiece. We want to get on Fox News and all of the other major news networks. We want to increase our profile because in their defense, we're seeing that the public outcry is so strong that the Attorney General of Missouri, I believe the governor of Missouri, these people are all rallying to their side and saying, if they're charged, we're going to pardon them or we're going to file motions to dismiss. So they have that option. They have the media spotlight. They can make these admissions and rely on public support to coast them through this thing. But you and I don't, right? So if you're charged with a small crime, admissions are not your friend at all. Do not do what the McCloskeys did. All right, let's go over to Patricia's. Patricia's is a little more interesting. So let's dive into this one. All right, so same thing, same charge, same stuff up here. This is her complaint. Same analysis. It's also a class 3 felony. Felony, you lose your right to vote, firearms, and so on. It's the same 5. Knowingly exhibited, presence of another, semi-automatic handgun versus the rifle, readily capable of lethal use. So let's put a pin in that one too. A weapon readily capable of lethal use. We're talking about Patricia. Okay, Patricia was the one with the little handgun. Readily capable of lethal use in an angry or threatening manner. And again, signed off on by Christopher Hinckley. The actual probable cause statement authorized by, once again, Curtis Bergdorf. Knowing that false statements on this form are punishable by law, state that the facts contained herein are true. That's what I'm talking about. All right. He says, I have probable cause to believe that the same stuff happened. So here's where are we at. Okay, so here we've got the investigation continues. Same stuff. 2 victims, 1 or more, walked through the gate. Same exact language. Shortly thereafter, the defendant emerged. So this is knowingly. That's the first element. Armed with what was later determined to be a semi-automatic handgun. That's the third element. And began yelling to go and pointing the handgun at the demonstrators, amongst whom were MD and MH, placing them in fear, which is all going to be the 5th element. So we've got 1, we've got the 2 victims, we've got 3, the semi-automatic handgun, we've got 5, angry and threatening. So we're missing number 4. Where is element number 4? Remember what that one was? That was a weapon readily capable of lethal use. And so I want to show you what happened with that. Now before we get there, let's talk about the admissions, right? The admissions here are becoming a big issue. Made public statements, acknowledged. She called 911 to the police and said, I've got to go get a gun as soon as she ended the call. So this officer is going to be really, really relying on those types of statements to incriminate her. If she admits it, why do they even have to prove anything, right? She made the admission. She said that she got a gun and she was pointing it at protesters, and there's video for it. So that's the probable cause statement. It seemed pretty weak to me, and in particular, weak related to element number 4, a readily capable of being used.